When I was 11, my mother started measuring the house. She never told me why. At first, it was small things. She'd stand in the upstairs hallway with a yellow tape measure stretched from one wall to the other, chewing the inside of her cheek, writing numbers into a little blue notebook she kept in the junk drawer. Then it was the windows, the bedroom closets, the bathroom door frame, the depth of the linen closet, the distance from the kitchen sink to the back wall. She wasn't handy. She wasn't renovating. She wasn't planning anything. She was checking the math. Whenever I asked what she was doing, she'd smile too quickly and say, "Just making sure." Making sure of what? She never said. The house sat at the end of a dead road in western Pennsylvania, far enough from town that the nights were actually dark. Not suburban dark, real dark. The kind where the trees beyond the yard looked like one solid wall, and the porch light never seemed to reach far enough to matter. My dad had inherited the house from an uncle none of us knew very well. The man died in a nursing home in Ohio and left behind no wife, no kids, just this 2-story farmhouse on 5 acres and a detached garage that leaned a little more every winter. My parents sold our split level near Greensburg and moved us out there because, in my dad's words, you don't turn down a free house. My mother never said that sentence, but I could tell she hated it. It wasn't the house itself, not at first. It was what came with it. There was old furniture in the attic that nobody claimed, a row of heavy coats in the front closet that smelled like cedar and cold dust, jars of screws in the basement, sorted by size with handwritten labels from someone dead, 3 locked desk drawers, a sealed wooden trunk in the garage loft. The whole place felt less like moving into a new home and more like intruding on a life that had been paused in the middle. My dad loved that about it. He liked saying things like, they built stuff to last back then, while knocking on door frames or admiring the cast iron radiators like they'd survived a war. He saw history, craftsmanship, savings. My mother saw the upstairs hallway and stopped speaking for a full 10 seconds. I remember that clearly. It was the first day we carried boxes in. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, connected by a long, narrow hall. It should have been simple, straight shot from the stairs to the back bedroom, but it didn't feel right. About halfway down, it seemed to pinch inward, then widen again near the end. Not enough to notice all at once, just enough to know that walking it felt wrong, like the walls didn't fully agree with each other. My mother stood at the top of the stairs, staring down that hall, and I watched some private calculation happen behind her eyes. My dad came up behind us, carrying a lamp, and said, "Well?" And my mother said, very quietly, "It's smaller than it should be." That was the first time she said it. The second time was 2 weeks later when I woke up around 1 in the morning and found her standing alone in that same hallway in her nightgown, one hand flat against the wall. The hall light was off. Only moonlight from the bathroom window lit her enough for me to make out her shape. "Mom?" She turned too fast. "Jesus, Daniel. What are you doing? Go back to bed. Why are you in the hallway?" She looked at the wall one more second before answering. I heard something. What kind of something? But all she said was, "Go back to bed." The next morning she acted normal. Packed my lunch, signed a field trip form, asked if I fed the dog. But when I got home from school that afternoon, I found pieces of blue painter's tape running along the upstairs walls, making little marks and boxes, as though she started mapping them. My dad made fun of her for a while, not cruelly, the way husbands do when they think a thing is temporary. "You taking inventory?" he'd ask. Or, house shrink again today? She never laughed. The little blue notebook started filling up. Eventually, she bought graph paper. And there were other things, small things that didn't feel connected until much later. The dog refused to go upstairs after dark. Duke was a black lab mix, old and lazy, and generally unbothered by anything except thunderstorms. But once the sun went down, he'd stand at the bottom of the stairs staring upward, ears pinned back, refusing to move. My dad tried carrying him upstairs once. Duke went stiff in his arms and started whining low in his throat until he was set down again. The bathroom door upstairs would sometimes be open when everyone swore they had closed it. I'd hear footsteps in the hall at night and assume it was one of my parents, then mention it at breakfast, and get that weird silence where both adults go still. Things went missing, but never in obvious ways. A flashlight from the kitchen drawer, one of my father's wool gloves, my mother's sewing scissors, a silver hair clip she kept by the sink. Once, one sneaker from my gym shoes. My father blamed me for that. Then my mother found the missing sneaker in the linen closet, tucked behind a stack of folded towels. Nobody admitted putting it there. The first thing that happened directly to me was in November, maybe a month after we moved in. I was brushing my teeth before bed, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror, not thinking about anything, when I saw movement behind me. Someone crossed the upstairs hallway, not running, not fast, just a figure passing from one side to the other, visible for maybe half a second through the bathroom doorway. I spun around so hard toothpaste went down my shirt. The hallway was empty. I stood there listening. Nothing. I checked all 3 bedrooms. Empty. Then I shouted downstairs, asking if one of my parents had just come up. There was a pause. Then my dad yelled back, "No." I didn't tell them what I'd seen. I don't know why. Maybe because even at 11, I could already feel the pressure in the house. Too much listening. Too much pretending. Too much not saying things out loud. Telling them I'd seen somebody in the hallway would make it real. And none of us were ready for that yet. So I kept it to myself. A week later, my mother sent me into the basement for canned tomatoes. The basement was unfinished, with damp concrete, fieldstone walls, and a single hanging bulb controlled by a pull chain. It always smelled like wet stone and rusted metal. I hated it in the normal way kids hate basements. Not because of ghosts. Not because it had too many dark corners. I was halfway down the stairs when I noticed the bulb was already on. I almost turned back, thinking my dad was down there, but I could hear him outside splitting wood. So I kept going. I got the tomatoes from the pantry shelf, turned around, and saw something in the old utility sink. A line of marbles. 8 of them. Blue, green, amber, one cloudy white shooter at the end. They were lined up carefully along the back edge of the sink, like somebody had arranged them by hand. They had not been there that morning. I know that because I used that sink to rinse mud off my shoes after school. I stood there staring at them until my mother shouted down asking what was taking so long. When I brought the cans up, I told her what I'd found. My dad overheard and laughed. Probably came from the garage, he'd said. Rolled in there years ago. They were lined up, I said. He opened his mouth to respond, then looked at my face and stopped. My mother went pale. That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. Not screaming, low, controlled voices. Worse than screaming. "You said it was one summer," my mother said. "It was," my father answered. "One summer when he was 13. And you didn't think this mattered?" It was stories, she knew. Would you lower your voice? She knew, Mark. I moved closer to their bedroom door, heart pounding. My father said a name I had never heard before. Elias didn't do anything. He was a weird kid, that's all. My mother answered. Children don't wall over parts of their own house for no reason. The next morning, my father acted furious that I left my bike in the driveway. My mother barely looked at either of us. That afternoon, while my parents were both outside, I went inside the garage loft and forced open the sealed wooden trunk. I know how that sounds now, but I was 11, scared, and old enough to know when adults were hiding something from me. The trunk sat under the far gable window, buried under horse blankets and rusted tools. It had a padlock on it, but the wood around one hinge had dried and split badly enough that I could pry it apart with a screwdriver. Inside were books, papers, toys, and old clothes. Not my uncle's. Older. A child's winter coat, small and brown, with one button missing. 3 tin soldiers, a dead flashlight wrapped with black tape, several water-damaged notebooks, and beneath those, a stack of photographs. Most were black and white. A few were faded color. They showed the house across different decades, the porch, the yard, the kitchen, winter snow up to the windows. And in almost every photo, if you looked past the person meant to be in the picture, there was someone else. A boy. Sometimes at an upstairs window, sometimes standing at the edge of the yard, half hidden by the trees, sometimes only an arm or shoulder inside a doorway. Same narrow face, same dark hair, same expressionless stare. Too old in one photo, too young in another, or maybe exactly the same age in all of them. At 11, I couldn't explain why that terrified me more than a ghost would have. A ghost had rules. A ghost belonged to a story. A boy in a family photographs was proof. One of the notebooks had a name written inside the cover in careful block letters. Elias Foss. Most of the pages were damaged, but some were still readable. Measurements, floor plans, lists, tallies, and the same sentence written over and over. The house has room if you make room. Then, there are spaces people don't know they are leaving. And finally, pressed so hard into the paper it almost tore through. When you stay still enough, they stop seeing you. I heard my father come into the garage and barely got the trunk shut in time. That night, I waited until my parents were asleep and took one photo and one torn notebook page into my room. I hid them under my mattress. 2 nights later, I woke up to something tapping the bed frame. Just once. Just a soft click from underneath. Then another. Then one on the wall beside the headboard. Then one from inside the closet, not loud, not trying to scare me. Checking. That's the only word for it. Checking. I stayed absolutely still. I don't know for how long. Eventually it stopped. I stayed absolutely still. I don't know for how long. Eventually it stopped. The next morning, the photo and the notebook page were gone from under my mattress. That was the first moment I knew for certain there was another person in the house. Not a ghost, not mice, not old wood. A person. I ran to my mother before I was even dressed and told her everything. I expected disbelief or panic or that fake calm adults use when they're deciding whether a kid had a bad dream. Instead, she looked sickly unsurprised. She didn't ask if I was sure. She asked what exactly was taken. When I told her, she closed her eyes. My father came into the kitchen halfway through and my mother turned to him and said, "Tell him." Dad stared into his coffee. "Tell him now," she said. So he did. When my father was 13, he spent one summer at the farmhouse with the uncle who would later leave him the property. His cousin Elias was 15, and already, according to every adult in the family, not right. That's how people described him. Not right. He barely went to school. He hated being outside. He would disappear for hours inside the house, then reappear in rooms no one had seen him enter. He was obsessed with the ideas that rooms lied. He said the inside of a house never really matched the outside if you measured carefully enough. He spent whole days tapping on walls, drawing floor plans, and claiming there were hollow places inside the house where a person could live if he learned how. At first, the adults thought he was just eccentric. Then things started happening. Objects moved. Doors opened at night. One of my father's sisters woke up to find muddy footprints under her bed. Their aunt swore she heard breathing from the parlor vent. A farmhand quit after finding someone watching him from inside a crawl space beneath the pantry floor. Eventually, a younger cousin disappeared for almost 6 hours and was found dehydrated and incoherent inside a wall cavity behind the upstairs linen cabinet. She kept repeating the same sentence. He showed me where the house was bigger. After that, the family sent Elias away for treatment. My great uncle sealed parts of the house shut. Crawl spaces were bricked up. False openings were covered. Walls were rebuilt. Then the family stopped talking about Elias, almost completely. My father had convinced himself that was the end of it. Was he dead? My mother asked. My father didn't answer. That was answer enough. She sent me to school anyway. I spent the whole day sick with dread and came home to find pencil marks and tape all over the upstairs hallway. My mother had spent the day measuring again, but now she wasn't measuring like someone checking math. She was measuring like someone trying to expose a lie. The dining room table was covered with county plat maps, deed papers, graph paper, and handwritten calculations. He was wrong, she kept muttering. There isn't more room. There's stolen room. I didn't understand what that meant. She finally showed me. The outside measurements of the second floor, minus the wall thickness, should have allowed for a hallway about 6 inches wider and nearly 3 feet longer than the one we had. That's impossible, I said. It should be. Then where does it go? She looked up toward the ceiling. That is what he wanted people not to ask. My father came in carrying groceries and stopped when he saw the table. He didn't get angry. He just looked tired. "We are not doing this," he said. My mother stood up. "He's in the house." "No." "He took something from our son's mattress." "He is in the house, Mark." My father slammed the grocery bag down, so hard a jar of pasta sauce broke inside it. For a second, none of us moved. Then he said, much quieter, "If he were in this house, we'd know it." That night, we found out how wrong he was. The power went out just after midnight. Not the whole neighborhood, not the road, just our house. We could see lights from distant homes through the trees. Only our property had gone dark. My father grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check the line by the meter. My mother lit candles and told me to stay in the living room. I didn't. I heard something from upstairs. Not footsteps, a dragging thump, then another. Like something heavy being pulled slowly across wood. I went to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The darkness at the top was almost complete except for the weak candlelight behind me. Then a flashlight beam snapped on upstairs, not my father's. He was outside. This beam shone from somewhere inside the hallway itself, Not from any room. A narrow white line slipped across the wall, paused, then vanished. I shouted for my mother. She was beside me immediately, and then we both saw the bedroom door close. Not swing. Close. Like someone on the other side had pulled it gently shut. When my father came back inside, there was mud on his boots and a strip of cut wire in his hand. The power line had been severed, with tools. That was the moment all denial ended. We left before dawn and stayed at a motel outside town. My father called the sheriff's office. 2 deputies came out the next morning, searched the property, found nothing. They checked the attic, the basement, closets, the garage, under the porch. One deputy suggested a trespasser had cut the line and fled when he heard us moving around. The other said old houses play tricks on families under stress. My mother laughed in his face. When we returned that afternoon, the upstairs hallway had changed. I don't mean it felt different. I mean it was measurably different. The pieces of painter's tape my mother had placed on the wall no longer lined up with her numbers. A gap that had measured 38 inches now measured 36 and a half. The linen closet seemed shallower. One section of the bathroom wall sounded solid. Another sounded hollow. My mother became convinced someone was moving parts of the house from the inside. At the time, I thought that was impossible. Now I think impossible is just a word people use for things they haven't seen done patiently. For the next week, my father slept with a shotgun beside the bed. My mother kept every upstairs light on after sunset, and I stayed awake as long as I could, because I had started to believe that sleep was when the house got closest. Then Duke disappeared. He was old, but he never wandered. One minute he was asleep on the kitchen rug, the next, gone. We searched the property for hours. My father walked the woods with a flashlight until 2 a.m, calling his name. My mother found the collar. It was under the basement stairs, placed neatly on the concrete where nothing could have dragged it. The same night, for the first time, we heard a voice. Not a full voice, a whisper, thin and dry, like paper being rubbed together. I was in bed. My parents were still downstairs. From inside my bedroom closet came a sound like cracking lips moving. Then, Daniel. I froze so completely it hurt. The voice came again, a little cleaner. Daniel, don't tell. I ran. I hit my parents' bedroom door so hard it slammed into the wall. My father grabbed the shotgun before I could even speak. My mother took one look at my face and knew it wasn't a nightmare. We all went into my room together. The closet door was open. Inside, clothes, shoes, a board game, and the smell of earth. At the back of the closet, though, my father saw a seam in the paneling. Not part of the original construction, added later. He shoved my clothes aside and smashed the panel with the butt of the shotgun. It splintered inward. Behind it was darkness and air. Cold, stale air, moving through a narrow hidden gap. My father shined the flashlight inside. The beam caught rough studs, a plywood shelf, insulation, and a passage just wide enough for a man to crawl. My mother made a sound I had never heard before or since. Not fear exactly. More like terror and vindication arriving at the same time. My father climbed in. I can still see his boots disappearing into the wall. The passage ran behind my closet and along the hallway. He called back that there were scratch marks in the wood. A blanket, water bottles, a coffee can full of cigarette butts, so old some had fused together. Then he went quiet. My mother shouted his name. No answer. Then from somewhere deeper inside the wall, my father yelled, "Back door, go!" My mother shoved me so hard I nearly fell down the stairs. We ran through the kitchen and out into the back porch, just as something crashed upstairs. Heavy movement, fast movement, no more hiding. Then a figure burst from the side of the house where no door existed. That image stayed with me for years. A man unfolding himself from impossibility. He came out through a narrow hinged section of siding, hidden behind dead vines and shadow. He was so thin he looked assembled instead of grown. Gray clothes stiff with dirt, bare feet, long, dark hair hanging over his face, and he moved fast, far too fast for someone who looked that starved. He sprinted low across the yard, toward the tree line. My father fired once into the ground ahead of him. The man didn't even flinch. He vanished into the dark. The sheriff's office came back. This time, they found what the first deputies missed. The hidden spaces weren't just in one wall. They threaded through the whole house, between rooms, above closets, behind the pantry, under the stairs, beside the chimney chase. Some had once been normal dead space. Others had been made over time by removing lathe, shifting paneling, building false backs into cabinets and wardrobes. And inside those spaces was evidence that someone had been living there. Maybe not continuously, but habitually. There were blankets, food wrappers, cans, water jugs, a battery radio, tools, a child's red mitten, my mother's sewing scissors, my father's glove, my missing sneaker, and photographs. Dozens of photographs. Not family photos. Photos taken from inside the walls, through drilled holes, vent slats, cracks in trim. My mother sleeping in bed, my father reading in the den, me at the kitchen table doing homework, me brushing my teeth, me asleep. Some of them were years old. That should have been impossible. We had only lived there a few months. I remember the sheriff looking at those photos, in a silence that felt almost respectful, like he understood evil had crossed into something more intimate. They brought dogs, county workers, men with pry bars and masks. The story reached the local news in a watered-down way. Hidden compartments discovered, possible trespasser, ongoing investigation. My parents wouldn't let me watch. They never found Elias, not then. What they did find, sealed behind the original linen cabinet, was a room. Not a passage, a room. Small, windowless, just big enough for a cot and a chair. One wall was covered in measurements, notes, dates, and names written directly onto the wood in pencil and ink. Height marks, weight estimates, lists. Some names had X's through them, some had stars, and over, in handwriting that got shakier with age. The house remembers the shape of you. Stay still enough, and it keeps you. They only think they leave. There was also a map. Not of our property, of other houses. Addresses from nearby counties and farther out, even out of state. Notes beside them. Access points. Measurements. Words like soft wall, crawl under tub, good vent voice. That was when the sheriff's face changed, because suddenly it wasn't about one old farmhouse. It meant Elias had learned how to find the hollow places in any house. We moved out within 48 hours. My father wanted the place burned. Insurance and law enforcement said no. The farmhouse was eventually condemned, then tied up in county ownership for years. Because the investigation never fully ended, and because paperwork has a way of preserving evil longer than memory does. We never got closure. No arrest. No body. No official statement saying the danger had passed. Just the knowledge that a man had lived inside our walls, watched us sleep, spoken my name through a closet door, and disappeared into the woods while half the county looked for him. For a long time, I told myself that was the end of the story. That's what people want from stories. A perimeter. A thing happened, then it stopped happening. But fear doesn't work like that. Fear takes measurements. You get older. You move away. You learn how to tell the story in a way that makes other people comfortable. You say things like, it was probably just a mentally ill relative, or rural police missed a lot back then. You trim the truth down until it sounds explainable. You do not mention that for years afterward, I never slept with my bed against a wall. You do not mention that my mother measured every house and apartment we lived in after that. You do not mention that my parents divorced 2 years later and never fully said why. You definitely do not mention that before my mother died, she mailed me one thing. That blue notebook. No letter. No explanation. Just the notebook and a padded envelope with a sticky note attached. It said, "You were old enough to know. Be older now." I was 36 when it arrived. I almost threw it away. Instead, I spent 3 nights reading it front to back. Most of it was what I remembered. Measurements, sketches, exterior dimensions versus interior, notes on shifting walls and hidden seams. But near the back, she had written down things she never said out loud. Things she must have learned from family conversations, county records, or the sheriff's findings. Before the room was sealed as evidence, there had been other families, not just in our farmhouse. In at least 4 houses on Elias's map, there were reports, unconnected at the time, of missing objects, voices from vents, figures seen in mirrors, children waking up in rooms they hadn't fallen asleep in. One family in Ohio abandoned a house after their son insisted there was a second father who came out after midnight and stood at the end of his bed. In 2 separate cases, children disappeared briefly and came back with no useful memory except 1 or 2 phrases. He said not to tell where the hall bends. He showed me the room that doesn't count. And on the very last page of my mother's notebook, written so hard the pencil nearly tore through the paper, was a sentence that had lived in my head ever since. I do not think he follows families. I think he follows floor plans. That is an insane sentence. It should mean nothing. But once you read it, you start noticing things. You notice how many old houses don't quite make intuitive sense. False backs in cabinets, blocked chimney chases, dead air under stairs, useless soffits, attic knee walls, strange boxed-in corners, crawl spaces nobody ever enters. You notice how most people have never really known every hollow part of the place they sleep. And if you are curious enough, or damaged enough, or stupid enough, you start checking. I did. That's why I'm telling this now. 3 months ago, I bought a house. Not because I wanted one, because rent got bad enough that buying a small place outside Pittsburgh finally made more sense on paper. It's a narrow brick duplex built in 1928, 2 stories, partial basement, sloped ceilings upstairs, fresh paint, nice neighborhood. Cheap because the previous owner died, and the kids wanted a fast sale. I almost backed out during inspection, when I walked the second floor and felt it. That same slight pinch in the hallway. Not dramatic, not obvious, just enough. I told myself no, absolutely not. Trauma sees patterns. Trauma finds old shapes inside new things. I was not going to become my mother with a tape measure and a notebook and a private religion built around hidden walls. So I moved in anyway. For the first month, nothing happened. Then I lost a flashlight. Last week, I found it in the upstairs linen closet, behind a stack of towels I hadn't even unpacked yet. Yesterday, while replacing an outlet in the guest room, I pulled the cover plate off and found writing on the stud beside the electrical box. Small, careful, hidden where no one would ever see it unless the wall was opened. Not an old construction note, a sentence. It said, "Still enough is almost invisible." I stood there for a long time. Then I did exactly what my mother would have done. I measured the room. And tonight, before I sat down to record this, I measured the hallway. The outside of the second floor, from brick edge to brick edge, minus the wall thickness, should allow for a hallway 42 inches wide. Inside, it measures 39. I've checked 6 times. I know what people will say if they hear this. Trauma, coincidence, old house weirdness, a previous owner with a dark sense of humor, confirmation bias, a family legend that got bigger over time. Maybe. I would prefer maybe. But there's one last thing I haven't told you. When I opened the wall tonight, I didn't find a person. I found a narrow space. Dust, old wood, a strip of floor between studs, and placed neatly in the center of it, as if someone had set it there and expected me eventually, was a blue glass marble, cloudy in the middle. The same kind I found lined along the basement sink when I was 11. Only this one had something wrapped around it, a strip of paper. I haven't opened it yet. It's sitting on the desk beside me while I say this, because some part of me knows that as long as that paper stays folded, there's still a version of the world where this is all grief and architecture and inherited fear. And if I unfold it, and it says my name, then I'll have to decide whether my mother was wrong, whether he didn't follow floor plans, whether he followed us, or worse, whether he didn't have to. Because maybe the truth is what he wrote all over that hidden room in the wall, until the words stopped looking like language. Maybe the house really does remember the shape of you. Maybe once you've lived inside the hollow places, some part of you never fully leaves. And maybe that's why, for the last 20 minutes, while I've been sitting here telling you this story, there's been a sound coming from inside the wall behind my desk. Not scratching, not pipes, just 3 soft knocks, waiting for me to answer.